Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing an in-depth conversation about genre snobbery. I wanted to present the prompt to all of you about genre snobbery, asking what are your experiences of it, how has it affected you, what are your thoughts on it in general, and a lot of you left really incredibly thoughtful responses to that. This is also going to be a sister video, companion video to one about anti-intellectualism, so if you are interested in participating or you have thoughts about that, then I will have the day this video goes up a post once again where you can chime in about your thoughts about anti-intellectualism. While anti-intellectualism can be applied incredibly broadly to a lot of different topics, we'll still try to keep it book-centered, though I know sometimes it will bleed into some other topics. And you'll see as we go through the genre snobbery comments how you can already witness a little bit the connections between the two. All of that said though, we'll go ahead and jump into this one. This very first one I thought was a perfect one to start with, as it really does kind of give us a general overview of I think where a lot of us land. So this one says, to me it all boils down to a cycle of 1, othering and tribalism, 2, stereotyping, and 3, gatekeeping, and then rinse and repeat. You aren't identical to me/us, so you are bad and aren't allowed in the group. Any individual or group can do it to any other. If you are an old school fantasy reader who feels hurt by years of being told your genre isn't respectable, it's easy to let that resentment make you critical of and unwelcoming to new people interested in it. If you're a reader of books that are no longer as popular, it's easy to become resentful, critical, unwelcoming toward readers of what is now popular. If you're in love with the new popular books and see people being negative about something that brings you joy and connection, it's easy to be resentful, critical, and unwelcoming towards any critics, no matter how well-intentioned or valid, and so on and so on. And then I'll even tag onto this, it's kind of related to something I'm wearing today, but I am a fan of both anime and manga, and there are individuals sometimes that are anime only. There are some people that are very much in the camp that manga is always better. And then even they will have resentment towards each other and they will be bickering and they'll throw shade at each other. It goes into so many different areas, and you, of course, were just providing some examples, but so many of us can think of instances where this occurs. There are a number of things to go through within this, and I think you broke down the process of genre snobbery really, really well. But it is interesting because I do like assessing trends and seeing things, how things have shifted, and then even having been online in bookish spaces for quite a while at this point, it is interesting to watch how things evolve and then watch how people get excited about something, which is fun, but then at the same time, there is sometimes this feeling of they realize that this has been around for a while, right? You start to get like, wait, no, but I liked it first. And then you feel like you deserve somehow credit for liking something early, which we all have experienced either this feeling or if we've seen it in other people. Obviously, it's kind of the hipster effect. One thing that occurred not so long ago is that as we're assessing trends and as we're seeing things that were popular before get popular again, all that, there was a time where Six of Crows was extremely popular. And this was a little bit before Book Talk, because TikTok didn't even really exist, or at the very least, the concept of talking about books over on TikTok wasn't really a thing. So it was mostly you would see on Instagram and YouTube. And obviously it was somewhat of a booktube darling. Obviously it's more than just a booktube darling. It has reached massive success. And it's gone outside of just bookish spaces into, I would say, relative mainstream. There was even an adaptation that came out for it. So obviously it was incredibly popular. Not too long though, after that, when Book Talk started to take off, that was one of the stories that became really popular on Book Talk. And people on Book Talk were saying, why is nobody talking about this duology? It's so good. That's where I think the feelings can bubble up within people that have been fans for a long time. I'm once again going to return to the anime thing because I do feel like this is very relevant to the right now. So I am somebody who, as noted, likes manga and anime. And I have not been shutting up. I'm so sorry for all of you to have endured this, but I've been talking about a lot how excited I was for the Hat Atelier manga to be finally adapted after years and years and years. And the main character of that looks kind of like a character from another series. However, the character from the other series technically came out after, but the anime came out before the anime for this one. However, the character's name is Kifri from Witch Hat. Kifri was a character first, but now that the anime is coming out, people are calling him Timu Gojo. And the amount of rage that already is happening from Witch Hat fans about that, where they're like, no, he came first. What are you talking about? And we saw this with even something like people were saying that George R.R. Martin, his character of Daenerys from A Song of Ice and Fire was a copy of a character from Sarah J. Maas's series. People were like, you can just Google it. You can just Google it. There's a mix of things that happen. One of them is people being resentful purely because they feel as though they deserve credit somehow for liking something first. That, I think, is something a lot of us should reflect on. I am not a psychologist. I don't really know the nature of why that's a thing that so many of us experience or feel. But I think as long as you resist the urge to take that into a negative direction, you feel it and you're like, oh, what am I doing? This is silly. I'm glad more people are getting into it. If you challenge it, then I think it's fine. However, if you don't challenge it, then all you're doing is hurting the thing that you supposedly love. If you love a work of art, a work of fiction, then more people getting into it is a good thing, not a bad thing. You shouldn't be upset because now other people are discovering it, and by them discovering it, others are discovering it too. It's the more the merrier, right? That's how we should look at it. However, I do think this also can coincide with some people just having information slightly wrong, and then that is slightly irksome, because at that point, all you're asking is for people to remind themselves that they can search things, they can check dates. It's not that hard, they can check. I also think that the idea of stereotyping, this is prevalent and kind of a through line throughout most genre snobbery. And what's tricky about the stereotyping concept is that there are certain tropes or certain narrative devices or other such things that are common for certain genres. Genre fiction in particular, part of what makes it part of a genre is it utilizing certain things that we have come to expect of it. So I think we have to be mindful of the difference between, and I'm not saying you need to be mindful of it, I think you fully understand, but I think overall, kind of collectively, it's good to be mindful of the concept of stereotyping versus recognizing genre distinctions. It's just a slight perspective shift. If you are looking at fantasy, for example, and there are a lot of fantasy worlds, obviously, that are not our own world. Maybe they're slightly inspired by ours, maybe they're not, but regardless, they're different from ours. And yes, that is very common in fantasy works. That's what a lot of people want when they're reading fantasy. Does that mean it can't be a reflection of our own world or provide really in-depth, important commentary? No, of course not. It definitely can. But I think sometimes rather than people, if they have a preference where they just prefer things in our world, rather than saying, oh, I just don't really like that personally. I don't know what it is. I just like settings that are our planet or I don't even care if it's historical fiction. I just prefer this world. Okay, that's fine. But then when you turn it into stereotyping, it's like, oh, those people they just can't handle real world problems, so they have to read their make-believe stuff. And it's a very different way of approaching it. One is, as you noted, a way to try and other people. It's a way to put down what they like, and that's when the snobbery comes into the picture, where the other is just recognizing preferences. And then the last thing is you talked about gatekeeping. Gatekeeping, I think, also is kind of related to, no, I liked this first. This is just for me. And sometimes it's not even a matter of I liked this first. It's just, this is the group that's allowed to like this. We don't want to welcome anybody else. You have to be a very specific kind of fan in order to like something. I think that the gatekeeping definitely develops more so when there are fandoms involved, because sometimes even if people are like, this was my interpretation of something, especially if we're talking about something that is more vague and abstract, if somebody's providing their interpretation, but it's not the general fandom agreed upon interpretation, people can be very quick to be frustrated, angry, and then basically just insist you're not a real fan because you don't agree with groupthink. What I think all of it kind of condenses down into, to borrow your wording, what it all boils down into is utilizing all of these steps that you described to look down upon other people to make yourself feel better. And if that is somebody's response to art, I think they're kind of missing the whole beauty of what art can be and what it can do. Next up, this one says, I often see this in writers who think they're too good to read the genre they claim they're subverting. Like, quote, unlike other romances, my novel won't contain genre convention. And romance readers are like, that's why we like romance novels. Why are you taking the sugar out of the recipe? And then saying we're Philistines for thinking your cake doesn't taste good. I'm personally sick of, unlike those stupid comic books of old, my superhero story is bleak and violent, and the heroes are bad people. Like, okay, how about y'all get your own genre and leave Superman alone? There was a tiny part of me when I saw this comment that I was like, Marcus, is that you? Because I have a friend who really likes Superman and has read through a bunch of Superman comics. I know it's not my friend Marcus. It is good to subvert in order to provide a different angle on something or to approach something differently. I think that a lot of us have read First Law, and we recognize that the First Law trilogy is somewhat a subverting of the typical hero's journey. And then what you do with that is able to kind of look at something from another side, because the hero's journey is so hopeful, and it fills us with this idea of we can come together and we can accomplish a lot. And then in this story, it's like everything is meaningless, everything is pointless, none of us have any power over anything. Having that other side of the coin, it does resonate with some people differently because they're so dark that you're like, well, at least my life's not quite this bad. And so it just goes to show how we respond differently to things. And some people, my mother, for example, she prefers the happy and the light and the funny. And ever since I was a small child, I was drawn to sad stories, tragic stories, stories that explored those feelings that kind of make us uncomfortable. And she was always like, is she okay? Is there something wrong with her? Have I done something wrong? She was always so concerned, and it's just how we're different. And so I think it's not bad to have the subverting of expectations within certain genres, so long as you noted, it's not a way to say everything else in the genre is bad up to this point. Because the only way you can subvert something is if it starts to become regular or a pattern or an expectation. So easily the other could be true. And actually I think that that's true, speaking of Superman, your example, I actually think for a long time people were kind of getting a little bit tired, if we're zeroing in on not just Superman but superhero stories in general. They were getting a little tired of the more hopeful, happy feelings. And they were wanting the grittier, and they were wanting the darker, and they were wanting the ones that felt as though they were perhaps tapping into our more sinister sides. And then that became so popular that now we're kind of returning back to the hopeful. I think the new Superman movie was an example of that, of why can't we just have the camp, and why can't we just have the bright colors and the fun, and a character who, there's a line in the new superhero movie, the new Superman movie, where he says, like, maybe that's the real punk rock, when he's talking about trusting people, caring about society, caring about things in general. Maybe that's actually not the popular thing to do. Maybe people are too cynical and mistrusting. So it's just all a matter of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to say, and also if you're fortunate enough to have that story to tell at the time when that would be considered a subversion. So I think that as long as you're not subverting with the impression of that makes you better inherently, but rather you're just doing it because you have a story to tell, you have something you want to say, and it happens to fit within a certain mold that maybe looks different than others, I think all of that's all right. Ms. Lauren Elizabeth says there's also snobbery in how many books people read based on the genre. At the end of the year, you can see people saying, oh, well, if I only read romance, I could also read 300 books a year. Or people justifying how many books they read. I know I only read 4 books this month, but they were all chunky fantasy. I've seen this. It feels like every year. I see what you're describing about when people say, well, I could have read that many if I read that genre too, but I read other things. And what's funny about this is it depends on the angle. Some people are genuinely just presenting, here are my end of the quarter stats, here are my end of the year stats, and they just happen to mention how many fill in the blank manga or books, whatever kind of genre of books, whether it's different age ranges, YA, middle grade, or adult. They'll just say, this is how much I read. It's not meant to be a way to put other people down for how much they read. It's not a way to try and boost themselves. They're just sharing end of the year stats because it's kind of fun. And some people will take that personally, like it's an attack. That this stems from a couple of things. There is this competitiveness that some of us have developed around reading from an early age, because while I personally liked the AR program when I was a kid, and I think it's called different things in different places, and not everybody had this. If you don't know what it is, there was a program that was called, I believe, Accelerated Reader Program. And the idea was you would read certain books based off of your current level, and the current levels were associated with a dot on the side of the book that your library would have at your school. And then certain colors were for more advanced, and you would get points. They did try to encourage you to also read a mix of nonfiction and fiction. Point is, they had it where it was a little competitive, because then whoever was the AR reader that got the most points, then you would win something. I understand wanting to acknowledge a child who is putting a lot of effort in. However, I think for some people, they have always held on to that. And so this is like a new adult version of that, when they see what is basically somebody else doing better in the AR program than them. And obviously not literally an AR program, but what they almost kind of have internalized is that's the best AR reader. Then they're like, well, I have other stuff going on and I read more advanced stuff anyway. I read more of the ones that had the dark purple instead of the bright blue. Like, they have this idea that, well, I deserve recognition too. And it's fine to have not read as much. Now, if somebody is saying, I read this many, and for those of you that didn't, you're kind of a loser, that would be astounding to me. I've never actually seen that, though. I think it's just people sharing stats, because sometimes it's fun to share stats. I think that's all it is, but it is interesting the response that we have to that. And I know for myself as a kid, I mean, I loved to read, and I liked AR, and I tried to see it as more of like a personal challenge. I think some bit of competitiveness can be kind of fun sometimes, so I understand the angle. However, I can also see how it developed into something unhealthy, and hence why I'm tying it back to maybe why people react the way they do. It's not like if you do that, you win at life. Nobody's suddenly like, oh, I have found inner peace because I read more books than you. They're not doing better at life. They just happen to have read more books. And also, yeah, you might have read more if you had picked up more romance books, or you might have read more if you counted manga volumes towards that amount. Maybe you would have read more, but also, what is the point of reading for you? And that's the thing I think people have to constantly ask themselves, is the point of reading for you just to reach a certain number so you feel better than someone else? Because, hate to break it to people, but someone's always going to be better than you at something, and that's not the point of life. The point of life isn't trying to always be better than someone else. History Max 5479 sums this up pretty well. Genre snobbery is just one more way people try to use their tastes to feel superior to others. If you like something, good for you. My friends and I have dramatically different genre preferences, but we regularly gush about our likings and sometimes even read one another's recommendations. No judgment if it doesn't click, we just say so and discuss why it suited one but not the other. That sounds great. It sounds like you have a nice friend group. My husband and I, we have very different tastes. My husband and I have pretty consistently had overlapping big tastes, and then once you get into the specifics, different. So for example, we both majored in music. I was strings pedagogy, he was jazz performance. And with reading, I read obviously a lot of fantasy. Sometimes I read historical fiction, sometimes I read fiction, sometimes I read contemporary romance. And my husband reads a lot of literary fiction. He sometimes will pick up something that's more crime noir. So we just have different tastes. And weirdly, the thing where we line up the most would be manga. So you never know where things line up, but neither one of us looks at the other and thinks, wow, well, I read the better stuff. We obviously have our differences. Sometimes Sean will read a passage from one of his books to me, and he'll purposefully note it and want to read it to me because he knows I won't like it at all. There are instances where I'm reading something and I'm having a blast with it, but I'm like, you wouldn't like this. So it just depends on what your tastes are, and I think what you described with you and your friends is beautiful, and it would be a lot better if people had that approach a little more often. This next comment, your username is Lark and Legend, and a little music recommendation for all of you. All of you should listen to The Lark Ascending. It's a really, really beautiful piece of music. That's not really related, but I saw the word lark and I thought I would say it. Lark and Legend says, what comes to mind for me are the folks who will read a bestseller from a genre they're unfamiliar with and then proceed to denounce the entire genre based off that one book. I see this most often with romantasy and romantic fantasy. Like, look, I have a lot of issues with the works of Yaros, Mass, and Gillig, but they're just 3 authors. Pick up Fawcett, Ducey, Jensen. Every genre is going to have works that will move you. That's a hill I'm willing to die on. I agree with this. And I don't have a whole lot to say about this specifically because I think you captured it really well, but I'll tack something on to the end, which is that I also think it's okay if, because you only have so much time to read and because there's only so much time in the day, I also understand if you've tried a certain genre and you're like, I don't want to have to read so many until I find that one that I like. I know I like this other genre over here, and, you know, I maybe get through a book a month, if even. I just don't have the time, so I'd rather stick to something that I know I have a higher likelihood of enjoying. I think that makes perfect sense, so long as, of course, you don't turn around and then go, because all of those suck. You were talking about people who will read just a couple. I've seen people do this when they haven't picked up the genre at all. They will only watch reviews that are usually reviews that mock a given book or series or genre. They'll watch those, and then they'll watch enough of those where they have decided that they completely understand and that they know the genre, the ins and outs, without ever having picked up a book. Monica says in this next one, I sometimes find people are surprised when you like two different types of authors within a single genre that write totally different things, or their prose is super different. I'm not confused. I just like both for different reasons or at different times. Both can also emotionally gut punch me even though they're different. People will think like, oh, you get it, you know what's good. And then when you happen to mention you also like this other thing, there is a little like, really? Isn't that a little beneath you? Then they start to develop this idea of like, well, it must have been a fluke then that you liked this thing that I like. I remember showing up to an American Lit class in undergrad, and in the very first lecture, the professor said you can't find deep meaning in non-realistic settings because they're meant for entertainment, not meaning. Oh my gosh. I can't get over. I know this exists, but I'm like, you're just incorrect. I can't fathom, because there's beauty in all different kinds of art, which also includes different genres. I would immediately be like, I'm learning nothing in this class. I would, if that was as soon as you showed up. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to keep going. So, supposedly, they're just for entertainment, they have no meaning, and a genre without meaning is worthless. And then he proceeded to bash someone that was a candidate for the professor spot when he was applying because the other guy's area of study was superhero media. LOL. What an off-putting human being. I stewed over that for a long time. My personal outlook is this: things can exist for just entertainment without being deeply meaningful, and that's okay. Everyone likes being entertained. It's also okay to prioritize meaning over entertainment, but the best stories are both entertaining and meaningful. And I'll add too that while I agree that, you know, it's okay, your last statements, it's okay to like one over the other, I also think that, for me, I don't know that I think the best stories as an objective thing have to be both entertaining and meaningful necessarily. What I mean is I don't want to try and imply that if for somebody else their favorite story ever is the one that had the most meaning to them, even if they weren't entertained, I don't want to be like, well, that can't possibly be the best because it wasn't also entertaining. Because first off, what I even consider entertaining might be different from another person. I don't even think you're necessarily saying that. I think you're just saying that maybe people tend to also, their personal favorites, almost always the ones that are the most meaningful, also happen to entertain them. I think that's more so what you're getting at, though I don't want to speak for you. But I still have to add that things that are within genre are not just entertainment. Even if something's goal is to just be fun and just be entertaining, that doesn't mean it's worthless. But just because something is in a genre, to repeat myself, doesn't mean that it's only entertainment and that it can't have meaning. That's just such an unbelievably stupid thing to say. It's not even just that I think it's stupid. I think it's wrong. I really think you're just wrong. And I feel like that other guy should have gotten your job. I made an effort to read more literary fiction last year, and I'm glad I did. It got my brain working in different ways and helped me appreciate and empathize with real world situations. But still, my most impactful read last year was Blood Over Bright Haven. Any and all genres can say something worthwhile about the world or the human condition, and even when they don't, pure entertainment is worthwhile too. You watch sports? What a waste of your time. Sports don't even contemplate the mysteries of the universe. They're worthless. I liked that little tag on there at the end. Next up, the funny thing for me is almost the inverse, where if you read a snobbish book or prefer a certain prose style or amount of narrative depth, even within genre fiction, you are accused of being performative. Not only are there snobs, but there are also anti-snobs. True. And this will probably come up more in the anti-intellectualism debate, not debate, but conversation. But yes, I do find that on occasion, if somebody likes something and they're like, well, I really like this, and even if they're going so far as to say, I liked this thing better than this thing because for me this one was more meaningful, or this one had the writing itself I found to be more stunning. I feel like they utilized the language in ways that I was captivated by, and for that reason, I like this one more than this one. And when people, it's kind of that knee-jerk reaction I talked about before when they see somebody's read a bunch of books and they're like, well, I could have too if I just read the easy stuff. If they have that knee-jerk reaction there, they might also have the knee-jerk reaction here, where, like you're saying, they feel the need to be like, well, you're just trying to look smart. Next up, AJ Marie says, as someone who went to school for creative writing, genre snobbery was so interesting to me because it all depends on what circle you are in. My cohort was dominated by fantasy lovers and hopeful novelists, majority men. If you mentioned wanting to write YA or romance or a combination, especially mixed with fantasy, you would get an earful from them. The professors themselves leaned toward tolerance to outward dislike of any genre of fiction, fantasy to romance and everything in between. Creative nonfiction and literary fiction were considered the best forms of genre by my fiction professors, and the rest was quietly and sometimes pointedly looked down on. In smaller circles of those wanting to write YA or romance, there was a frustration with high fantasy and all the noise that came with it from fellow classmates. I fell in the middle of it all as someone who wanted to write fantasy YA, then fell in love with magical realism, and then ended up falling the most in love with poetry. Genre snobbery seems to me to be a weird spiral that is often less to do with the genre being cast down, but about people wanting to prove their genre is the best no matter what, or prove they are the coolest or smartest for liking something specific. I stayed quiet about most genres I loved because I liked all of it to varying degrees, and the rhetoric always felt sad to me. That is sad. I feel sad for you, and I wish I could be like, no, tell me about the poetry you like. I mean, I wish I had been in, well, I don't wish I would have been in one of your classes, because I would have been like, these people are insufferable. But at least I feel like we would have found camaraderie, because I would have thought it was so nice to hear about the things that you enjoyed, and I wouldn't have looked at it as like, no, that sucks. It's also so funny to me because your point about it just depends on the circles you're in. It doesn't just depend on that, which it does. I'm not disagreeing. It doesn't just depend on that. It also depends on the time period. Different things come in and out of fashion. Different things are looked down upon or uplifted. There have been times where all these people are just so sucked into reading novels and they're getting lost in these worlds. And there's some pretty funny stuff about when novels were first becoming more of a household thing. And the views of it just is consistently shaped and reshaped. And I don't understand why we feel so strongly. I mean, I apologize for consistently being like, I just don't get it. Like, I understand on some level the way in which people try to lift themselves up, or they're trying to provide a balm to something within them that has been harmed. And that makes me sad to think about. But I guess the point when I say I don't understand is like, yeah, that's not going to keep working. You are not going to become a more enlightened or a more intelligent or more capable person. Your external issues in your life don't suddenly become better just because you have insisted upon this idea that everyone around you agrees with, that actually this kind of work is better than this kind. It doesn't fix the things that are troublesome in your life, whether they are personal and things that are from trauma or something, or if it is some kind of like financial circumstances, health situations. This doesn't fix that. It doesn't fix that. I just want more introspection. All right, Grace, moving on. Grace said, when I was taking writing, editing, and publishing courses a few years back, I was struck by how much my instructors, several of them having some influence in the industry, clung to the literary versus genre binary, despite the fact that none of them could draw a clear line between the supposed opposites. As they defined it, literary fiction was thoughtful, character-driven, and a bit impenetrable for the average reader, and so it was less popular. On the other hand, they described the genre fiction, so for example, science fiction, fantasy, romance, and thrillers, as comparatively thoughtless, plot-driven, and appealing to the masses. Okay, I'm going to pause just there because you have a lot more to add, but it is shocking to me that they think that sometimes literature can't be plot-driven also. The idea of the literary fiction versus the others. Sometimes some books they're not character-focused whatsoever. they might be idea focused or thematically driven, but the idea that they would insist that they're character driven and then the genre stuff is always plot driven, again, I'm like, that's not necessarily right. That's not. Anyway, continuing on. Anyone reading this comment can probably immediately come up with several exceptions to this rule, and so could my instructors, despite their adherence to the false dichotomy. I vividly remember one of my instructors and editor and founder of a small press expressing her confusion at the existence of upmark fiction, which is literary books with wide appeal. I think this revealed a lot about my instructor's perspectives. There's obviously a lot of elitism inherent to this way of thinking. I will never get over that professor's shock at the fact that ordinary people might like some good books. More than that, in an even more obvious note to my fellow speculative fiction fans, there's the seemingly compulsive devaluing of genre fiction. Works that include magic or advanced tech or elves or aliens couldn't possibly have anything interesting to say, apparently. I recently picked up Le Guin's essay collection, The Language of the Night, and just read the essay, Why Are Americans Afraid of Dragons, this morning. In it, she questions the reluctance some seem to have about picking up fantasy in particular and genre fiction more generally. She asserts that while these kinds of fiction may not provide their readers with material wealth, imaginative fiction is nonetheless a vital tool in our own understandings of ourselves and each other. She says, quote, I believe that maturity is not an outgrowing, but a growing up. That an adult is not a dead child, but a child who survived. I believe that all the best faculties of a mature human being exist in the child, and I believe that one of the most deeply human and humane of these faculties is the power of imagination. So it is our pleasant duty as librarians or teachers or parents or grown-ups to encourage that faculty of imagination in... I'm sorry, this quote's making me emotional. To encourage that faculty of imagination in our children, to encourage it to grow freely, to flourish like the green bay tree by giving it the best, absolutely the best and purest nourishment it can absorb, and never under any circumstances to squelch it or sneer at it or imply that it is childish or unmanly or untrue. The essay concludes, it is by such statements as, once upon a time there was a dragon, or in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. It is by such beautiful non-facts that we fantastic human beings may arrive in our peculiar fashion at the truth. You continue on past that quote, I can't put it much better than that. I'd be negligent, though, if I left out my feelings on the other side of the coin. I've seen the occasional reader that dismisses literary works, I'm using my own definition of literary here, where it refers not to a specific genre, but a set of traits, including any fiction with a focus on characters and themes, as well as those that experiment with form, on the basis of their being pretentious. It feels like these readers are approaching fiction with the same false dichotomy in mind as my old instructors, but from a different angle, that the impenetrable nature of these works makes them less appealing or worth their time than their escapist counterparts. There's a good Le Guin quote about escapism too, but this comment is already pretty long. Feels like people are unnecessarily limiting the scope of their reading due to often false assumptions about genre or writing approach. At the end of the day, the most important thing is that people are free to choose what they read. Limitations on what people can or should read, whether internally or externally imposed, don't do any of us any favors. So, I could have just read your comment and be like, that's it for this video, because you worded it so eloquently, so beautifully. The quotes you provided, I really did have to take a second, because that quote is beautiful and also really makes me remind me, oh, I need to read more Le Guin, because that was incredible. And I don't know how anyone can look at that quote and then be like, no. I am shocked because it's so cutting and it gets so to the core of how we as people, the idea of growing into adulthood and this loss of something, and then the way in which fiction can kind of bring it back, and it allows us to understand better. I feel a little bit on repeat here, but what a beautiful quote. Everything you expressed is fantastic, and I also appreciate that you were approaching the other side as well, that you were talking about the idea of how people can sometimes decide, oh, that thing isn't for me because it's trying too hard to seem smart and it's not tapping into anything fun or exciting, and thus it's not worth my time, and how we do have this tendency to just view things in such a stark contrast when we don't have to. There is value in so many different things, and yes, preference is one thing, but it doesn't mean there isn't not only value for us in all sorts of different areas of not just fiction, but all sorts of different things in life. Not just that though, but also that it's going to be different from person to person. So I always say, trying to put restrictions on art to me, it's an indication that somebody fails to see what art can be and what art can become. Also, I'm so sorry to do this to all of you, but that quote about the beauty and how we are fostering a sense of imagination in children, and that we don't squelch it, and that we are providing for them our roles as adults in children's lives. This is why I love the series Witch Hat Atelier, because I feel like that's such a core theme of that story. And it is a manga, and also the art is beautiful. But I've been sitting, as I've been enjoying it again, because I love that series and I have for years, but I keep coming back to it thinking, like, is this going to end up being my favorite story of all time? Which is a huge thing. I get a little intense when I fall into something that I really love, but I just think that story captures so much of what you were talking about and what that quote is referring to. And I think that a lot of people would find a lot of value in that story. Regardless, though, I just really appreciate your comment. I thought it was so well put. It approached so many angles of the conversation. It was beautiful. So thank you for that. It encompassed everything really well. Charlie says, I read a wide variety of genres because I'm a firm believer that there is something for every reader in every genre. Let me tell you, the way that lit bros immediately disregard my opinion the second they find out that I read other books outside of literary fiction is atrocious. But I never experienced that from genre readers. Anytime I talk to someone who reads predominantly romance about the incomprehensible variety of my reading history, they are always so supportive and just happy to see people reading. Yet the second a lit bro finds out that I also happen to read romance or fantasy, my opinion on whatever literary fiction book we were talking about becomes moot to them, and it is a slap in the face. I'm sorry, Charlie, that you've had to deal with that. That sounds very frustrating. And I did kind of talk about this a number of times before, kind of hit on some of these points, but you kind of providing a personal example of this just goes to show that these aren't just ideas, these aren't just concepts, that this happens all the time. And the more that people actually share, I feel like, these sorts of experiences, the more it kind of opens people's eyes to how that can be. And I definitely feel it too. I mean, as somebody who makes videos about books, of course, my channel is predominantly fantasy, and I don't mind that sometimes if I'm talking about other genres, people are like, oh, I don't really care about these genres, I mostly am just here for the fantasy. I don't mind if that's their feeling and they skip ahead or they skip a certain video if they find that whatever I'm discussing isn't really for them. That doesn't bother me. But I do find that if I happen to step outside of fantasy even, so you're talking about how literary fiction versus genre, but if I am talking about predominantly fantasy for the most part, predominantly adult fantasy for the most part, but then I happen to talk about contemporary romance, or I talk about YA fantasy, there is sometimes a different tone to the comments, or there's a different tone to the way people respond to me talking about it. Additionally, if I happen to dislike something that is romantasy or fantasy romance, the willingness to enjoy the dislike that I have for a certain book when it falls into one of those genres is much higher than if I happen to dislike something that just falls into fantasy. I think there is this sort of accepted dislike of certain genres, or like this idea of, well, we can all agree this is terrible, right? The more involved you get in these conversations, the more you start to pick up on the ways in which certain ideas are perpetuated, or the subtle ways that people will put something down in how they word it, the differences in how they word it. So I do think it's important for us to kind of always, like I was saying with your comment, share these experiences we've had, because some people haven't had these experiences personally, and when they see how many other people have had it, they're like, oh, I guess this is more of a thing than I realized. This one says, despite me thinking that this is an old hat and shouldn't be in the conversation anymore, I still have people in my life, in real life, who think fantasy and sci-fi is demonic. I feel like I'm still living in the satanic panic of the 1900s whenever I try to talk about my love of reading with older people in my family. I feel like as a society we should be over this, but apparently not. Is this still a common occurrence, or do I just know some really wacky religious people? I would love to know how many people are experiencing this besides me. Is this still a general attitude certain people have, or are these people the outliers? So, I know what you're talking about. I kind of grew up in a very religious area, and I was told as a child by someone that reading any kind of fiction was a sin because all fiction is a lie. So, I can tell you that as a child, I don't know that I would have been like, that's definitely the outlier, because that was something I had told to me. But broadly speaking, yes, it is kind of, from what I can tell, I don't think most people think that. I will say, I think there is more of this than maybe some people know. If they didn't grow up in communities that are more oriented in this way, then maybe this would be surprising to them. It's not necessarily surprising to me. However, from what I can tell, I would say that no, this is not particularly a commonly held belief across all of mankind. I think this is very specific to certain groups. And I hope you don't think you're demonic because you like to read. This last comment is of a different variety than the others, which you will discover very quickly what I mean by that. It says, "Is it really my fault for being a snob? I don't control what thoughts pop in my head. I see someone reading self-help and my next thought is, what a loser," or something similar. I can't help it. I choose to not express those opinions, and that's a different matter, but I am an innate genre snob. I appreciate your willingness to share. I will agree that we can't always control what thoughts pop into our head. We can, however, challenge those thoughts. We can ask ourselves, why do I have this thought? Where did this thought come from? Do some introspection. And then you can arrive at different places than whatever the initial thought was that popped into your head. To answer your initial question, is it your fault? Yes. That concludes our genre snobbery discussion. If you'd like to add anything to it, feel free to do so. If you would like to participate in the anti-intellectualism conversation, I will have the post, as noted at the beginning, that correlates with that up the day that this video goes up. And then also, if you're looking for any additional videos that are in this style that are more community-oriented and long format, I will have my From Readers playlist linked. We have done a lot of videos in this series, and I'm always really appreciative of all of your input, all of your thoughts and opinions about these conversations. It definitely makes it much more valuable, I think, by having all of you engage with it. So thank you to all of you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.